As I said, their anticipation date, barring anything unforeseen, will be on or about the first of the year in 2012. Okay, any questions about any of that? That should be a nice segue into Mr. Fisher is here, liaison from the President of the Board of Commissioners and the liaison of that body to this board. And Mr. Fisher, I know, wants to update us with regard to the status of our proposed revisions to Chapter 115.
Thanks, Herb. As you stated, the Delaware County SPCA had announced that they were going to terminate the receiving of animals. I believe that was back in July. They did extend that process through the end of year. And the county has responded by putting together a plan to build a animal protection shelter facility on the county level. This is substantive change, I think, that occurred during the year, and it's something that we need to address. As you know, the SPCA does their best to adopt out animals. Their mission is, in fact, to save animals, not destroy animals. Unfortunately, the county's solution to this problem is actually a kill shelter, and they probably won't be doing that much work in terms of attempting to place these animals. So that kind of brings me to a topic that we didn't really deal with directly in the draft recommendation to the Board of Commissioners in Chapter 115. And since that time, we had the Board of Commissioners individually discussed this topic. We also discussed this topic with the solicitor and the director of community development at the time, and looking at the issues that we're faced with in terms of what to do with animals that are found in the township, whether they're feral cats or stray animals, raised a lot of important questions. After looking closer at it and talking with some of these outside groups, as you know, when the Board of Health finalized their draft and sent it to the Board of Commissioners, the Board of Commissioners received almost 200 emails in just 2 weeks' time with lots of concern and worry about where we were headed as a township in terms of humane treatment of animals, and more importantly, in recognizing the existing TNR, trap, neuter, return processes that are going on not only here in the township, but also in the county, in the state, and the entire U.S. So after looking at that a little bit closer, we did some research on the staff level and the board level into TNR and what that has to offer us as a township. We discovered that there seems to be a pretty decent underground process that goes on where many volunteers are involved in rescue and TNR operations throughout the township. But after looking at that, I realized that there was no oversight. That it's I hate to use the term loosey-goosey, but it's very loose. There's no defined leader of those processes that go on. There's no regulation of those processes that go on. And yet they're viable in terms of dealing with animals that are in the wild. So what I'm going to do is bring back to the Board of Health a draft with some new provisions in it that would recognize TNR, would also recognize the need for regulation around TNR, would also look at some of the provisions in the draft that was sent to the board. In particular, there was a provision that required licensing of cats, and then the identification of the licensing of a cat would be a tag that would be worn on a collar. Or at least that's a practical way to do things. It turns out, after talking to many people, that would be very impractical. I didn't have much support politically to move this forward because of that. Quite frankly, we weren't going to get the ordinance passed as it was written. So it's coming back. We're going to give you guys a chance to look at these new issues that have come up, to look at the fact that we don't have a no-kill shelter solution in Delaware County as of January 1st. So I'll bring that draft back to the Board of Health to look at. And I want you to take a look at those suggestions that are placed back into it from administration and the Board of Commissioners, and see what you think, and see what's viable, what works, what's in the best interest of the public health, and to make it work. You know, the idea is to come up with something in the end that will work for everyone. Certainly addressing the human health concerns, but also addressing these other ancillary issues of humane treatment of animals and what our township does with animals when we collect them. So that's what I have to share right now. I don't know if we have solutions to some of these issues, but they're certainly something we want to talk about from a township standpoint.
John?
Yes.
All the other townships around us seem to have been able to make that work. And from a public health standpoint, having animals about unattended are, I mean, from a public health standpoint, it's, I don't know, I feel like we made the recommendation. And you know, I mean, at that point, if people don't agree, I mean, we're the only township that does not have a leash law. There's even the surrounding communities have leash laws for, as ridiculous as it gets, even goldfish, you know, keeping them under control. But any animal that's owned is under control in every other township around us.
And those provisions are not being questioned by the board.
Mm-hmm.
The real issue is how do we identify a licensed cat? We know that cats, and I'm not the expert, but we know that cats, that if they do get out and they have a collar on, that cat's likely to be strangulated by their collar if it's caught on a tree branch or a fence or any other type of protruding post. So the big concern among I'd say the cat community is that you can't really put collars on cats.
Every cat that I have that comes in, I would say, has a collar on it,
well, it has
for
to,
identification or not breakaway
right.
collars.
But I think these are valid questions and good points from your perspective,
Mm-hmm.
but they have to be looked at closely, because what I'm hearing from other sources is that breakaway collars would be needed. They need to have a way to have the collar break away, because if someone's cat is outside, and it shouldn't be necessarily, but if the new ordinance prohibits cats at large, then we have to have a safe way and humane way to make sure that those cats are identified, so that if they do get outside, they would be identified for our purposes.
Okay. Do we know what the other townships do? Because it's the same thing. And I know there's, reading through all the ordinances that they have, there's no special mention of collars, but it seems to work with everybody else.
Well, Len, I don't want to get into the detail here, but let me differentiate between code and what works. We have lots of codes on our books that are great codes, but they're not easily enforced. We have a lot of codes on our books that, in some cases, cannot even be enforced because of the practical matters at hand. I'll use an example of a stop sign. The only time the stop sign is enforced is when a police officer is sitting around the corner from the stop sign. So if we have an ordinance that has certain provisions, it may not get enforced, and it's nice to compare to other townships, but quite frankly, if we get numbers from other townships, we may find out that there's virtually no enforcement of those ordinances.
Well, yeah, I understand that you don't necessarily want to get into this discussion at this meeting, but I feel compelled to say that stop signs and any other ordinance, most citizens do the right thing, and they obey the law, and they stop at stop signs, whether or not they fear that a police officer in a cruiser is sitting around the corner, waiting for them to go right through it. The fact of the matter is that these things have their greatest effect and benefit to the community as a deterrent to actions that would adversely affect the community. And my own view is that the kinds of things that we have recommended accomplish that mission. I'm looking forward to what you're going to send us, and we will certainly take the issue seriously. But that said, I think that enforcement is a specious argument at best. It just doesn't hold water.
John, I'd like to echo Dr. Donato's comments. I served on this committee, the subcommittee, and we worked for about a year or so in researching the surrounding counties, and it places this county as, the township rather, and it places this township in an anomalous position because their laws are on the books. And you can get into a question of enforcement or non-enforcement, but this is a public record. We made these recommendations as professionals, and the township can decide to accept them or not accept them, but I'm not sure if we have much latitude to change our opinions that are based on scientific information.
Okay, thank you.
The public health has been taken into consideration, which is what we're supposed to do, and we had looked at it extensively. And the research that the others have done is not from the same pool of experience.
Okay, any further discussion on that matter, which properly fell under old business for this agenda, although it's not listed there. Let's move on then to the